Hello, I'm Flora from Collingwood-Norris, and I thought I would just go over a few tips for materials and tools to use when you're doing visible mending. So the first thing you'll need is a needle. It's the main piece of equipment you need for visible mending and possibly the easiest. I use a tapestry needle. So you can see here it's got a large eye and a blunt point, and I tend to favour this rather than a needle that's sold as a darning needle, because the needles sold as darning needles have a sharp point, and I find that can often catch on the threads as you're weaving through the darn, and it can create a less neat mend. So for me, the tapestry needle is the best one to use, as it helps me create a much neater, nice looking mend. And the second thing to consider is your materials. So check the label of your garment, see if it's wool, cotton, if it's a mix, is it cashmere, because that will dictate what type of yarn you want to use when you're mending it. So if it's a cotton garment, use cotton to mend it. If it's wool or cashmere, use wool or cashmere, although those two fibres behave quite similarly in the wash. So if you had a cashmere garment but you can't find any cashmere to mend it with, you could use a lamb's wool, and that will over time feel quite nice and it will wash the same. So you can still create quite a sympathetic repair with a similar fibre if you can't find exactly the right one. But I don't recommend using wool to darn a cotton garment or cotton to use wool, because they won't ever sit as nicely on the piece that you're repairing, and they will always, I don't know, they'll always be much more sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, they won't be a sympathetic mend, basically. So I have a couple of examples to show you of mends I've done. This is a slightly thick, quite chunky cashmere jumper, and I've used a similar weight of cashmere to mend it, to darn it. So it blends in really nicely in terms of weight. It feels and looks very similar in terms of the weight of the piece. And the same with a much finer sweater. So this is a fine gauge cashmere sweater, and I've used lambswool on this actually, because I wanted the colours that I had in lambswool rather than the ones I had in cashmere. So for the fine one, I used a really fine lambswool like this. You can see it against my thumb. And I have some of this available on my website to buy in either colourful packs or neutrals, depending on your preference. And the great thing about finding a really fine wool is that you can double it up, or you can triple it, or you can quadruple it to make it the thickness that will work for your garment. So fine yarns are really useful to have when you're mending. But I also have some thicker lambswool available from my site, and that's much more useful for slightly heavier pieces. It can also be great if you want to add some embroidery, like my jumper, or decoration. If you want something to stand out, then a thicker yarn can be quite nice as that addition. If you're using your mending just to reinforce an area before it wears through, again, like on this jumper, so this is a Swiss darn that I've done just to stop a hole forming, so it was particularly thin in that area. So rather than using the thicker yarn, which would have been about the right weight, I might even need to double this up for this jumper, I've used the thinner yarn just to reinforce this worn area. And because I've used the thinner yarn over the existing knit, it creates a much more sympathetic mend. It doesn't stand out, it's not bulky, and over time it will just blend in much more naturally with the garment. So those are my few tips. It's choosing needles that are right for you, and I recommend the tapestry needle, and finding the right yarns, the right fibre and the right weight for your garment. That will really help you create a sympathetic mend, because even though visible mending is designed to stand out and be fun and be a feature, making it sympathetic to the garment, I think, really helps create something that's beautiful as well. Thank you.